A historic decision was made in the heart of Europe during one of the most tense summits in recent NATO history. The alliance's leaders approved a new minimum level of defense investment, 5% of the national GDP of each member country, with the exception of Spain. This figure, at first glance symbolic, represents a radical change in the West's collective security policy. The measure is seen by many as a direct preparation for a potential confrontation with Russia, whose recent actions have alarmed the entire world. After years of unfulfilled demands, especially under Donald Trump's leadership, the United States has once again pressed its allies to assume greater responsibility for their own defense. And this time, Europe has given in. Trump has made it clear that the Americans have been carrying the burden of Western security alone for too long. And this new demand has turned into a formal commitment, sealed between heads of state in a room where the mood was more of imminent war than diplomacy. For decades, NATO countries' official investment target was 2% of GDP. Yet many members have failed to meet that target. Now they are being asked to nearly triple that effort with a new 5% floor. But the investment will not be made haphazardly. The alliance has developed a strategic allocation to ensure that the money is spent with a laser focus on efficiency and readiness. Of the total, 3.5% will be allocated directly to the military, modernizing equipment, hiring and training personnel, and acquiring combat vehicles, fighter jets, armored vehicles, anti-aircraft systems, and ships. The remaining 1.5% will be devoted to something equally essential but often overlooked: national resilience. This includes critical infrastructure such as roads, railways, bridges, field hospitals, power grids, communication systems, cyber defense, and emergency logistics. The logic behind this new investment model is clear. NATO is no longer thinking only about defending itself. It is preparing to win a war from the first second, or rather, even before the first shot is fired. Recent experience has shown that modern conflicts no longer start with tanks crossing borders, but with lines of code, silent sabotage, and invisible drones. Russia has demonstrated this time and again. From the invasion of Crimea in 2014 to the massive attacks on Ukraine in 2022, the Kremlin has made it clear that it is ready to use military force to rewrite Europe's borders and challenge the international order. For NATO, Moscow poses not only a direct threat to Eastern European countries, but a threat to the continent's very stability. In the face of this, hesitation could mean losing lives, territories, and sovereignty. NATO's own Secretary General was blunt. If Europeans don't want to learn Russian, they'd better start investing heavily in defense now. The message was harsh but realistic. And on the other side, Russia's response was quick to come. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov accused NATO of using Russia's image as an artificial enemy as a convenient excuse to justify massive increases in military budgets. According to him, the West needs an enemy, and Putin has been chosen for the leading role. However, for the alliance's leaders, there is no longer any room for naivety. The war has already begun, even if it has not yet officially reached all countries. And now, the priority is to ensure that, if it does come, countries are prepared to resist it from the very first second. With the new NATO plan approved, operational details have begun to emerge. The main concern now is to turn this robust budget into real military and civil response capability. It's not just about acquiring more weapons, but about ensuring that if an attack does occur, countries are ready to respond within hours, not days. The alliance knows that the modern enemy does not wait. The attack could come in the form of a hypersonic missile, an armed drone operating from thousands of miles away, or a cyber attack that simultaneously paralyzes hospitals, power grids, and railways. That's why the 1.5% devoted to national resilience is considered as strategic as the tanks and fighter jets purchased with the remaining 3.5%. 21st century warfare demands digital robustness, logistical capacity, and civil resilience in equal measure. NATO generals have learned from recent experience that often the war begins before it becomes visible, and winning such conflicts requires prevention, foresight, and action before the first impact. When NATO troops were deployed to Eastern Europe in 2015, entire convoys faced unexpected obstacles. Undersized bridges, tunnels incompatible with military vehicles, deteriorated roads, and tracks that were too narrow. The old Soviet infrastructure, inherited from the Warsaw Pact era, was simply not designed to support the logistical standards of a modern Western force. This posed a lethal risk. In the event of a conflict, it would be impossible to transport reinforcements quickly to the front line. That's why a significant portion of the new resources will be channeled toward build and modernize critical infrastructure in Eastern Europe. Strategic highways will be widened, bridges reinforced, railways upgraded, tunnels expanded, and logistics centers transformed into rapid mobilization hubs. NATO has understood that if Russia attacks, the first blow will fall there, on the doorsteps of Poland, Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. These countries will be the first to feel the impact. And it is precisely there that the response capacity needs to be more agile, more robust, and more efficient. But even with such urgency, there was resistance within the bloc itself. Spain has positioned itself against the new 5% level, claiming that its current 2.1% would already be enough to meet its commitments to the alliance. The Spanish Prime Minister argued that the country already makes a significant contribution to collective security, and that doubling investment would put pressure on other essential areas of the national budget. However, the NATO Secretary General was emphatic. The 3.5% for military capabilities and the 1.5% for resilience are non-negotiable goals. It is not just about numbers, but about real preparation in the face of a scenario that changes every week. He made it clear that countries will be regularly monitored for progress on their commitments, and that transparency will be total in this new chapter of the alliance. Furthermore, another critical point was raised during the summit. The European defense industry is not prepared to sustain a prolonged war against an adversary like Russia. There is a lack of ammunition stocks, strategic components, and active production lines. Therefore, a specific forum was created within NATO to expand THEBLOC's military-industrial capacity. The goal is to accelerate new contracts with defense companies, encourage technological innovation, and ensure large-scale production of advanced weapons, vehicles, and communication systems. The idea is that if a protracted war breaks out, NATO countries do not rely exclusively on American stockpiles, a dependence that has proven dangerous in previous conflicts. This movement also represents a clear attempt to strengthen the European defense industry as a strategic sector of the economy. Investing in defense now also means investing in technology, jobs, innovation, and digital security. The countries that lead this movement will have not only a military advantage, but also an economic one. The arms race of the 21st century will not be won with bullets alone, but with chips, sensors, artificial intelligence, and the capacity for mass production. NATO has announced a new minimum level of investment in defense, 5% of the national GDP of each member country, with the exception of Spain. The measure is seen as a clear preparation for a possible confrontation with Russia. The message is unequivocal. The West is rearming, and this time in a hurry. The alliance does not want to be surprised, nor does it want to repeat the mistakes of the past, when conflicts were underestimated until they became uncontrollable. The decision, although taken by consensus, carries a somber warning. We are facing a reconfiguration of the global military balance. And at the heart of this transformation is the realization that Russia, with its increasingly aggressive posture, can no longer be contained by diplomatic declarations or economic sanctions alone. Reality has imposed a different logic. Deterrence needs to be concrete, visible, and functional. The decisive pressure for this historic leap came from the United States, more specifically with the return of Donald Trump to the presidency. Trump, since his first term, had made it clear that he would no longer tolerate European complacency regarding security. According to him, the Americans were paying for the protection of a continent that refused to pay its share. With his return to power, this demand became an ultimatum. Either Europe invests in its own shield, or it will be left alone. And it was this veiled threat, or perhaps not so veiled, that pushed European leaders to agree to the increase from 2% to 5% of GDP in defense spending. But this budgetary increase is not limited to tanks, missiles, and troops. NATO's plan foresees a strategic division of investment. 3.5% will be allocated to classic military capabilities, weapons, force maintenance, combat vehicles, fighter jets, ships, tactical communications. The remaining 1.5% will be applied to areas that strengthen national resistance. critical infrastructure, cyber protection, field hospitals, logistical mobility, and civilian structures capable of sustaining a society during a prolonged conflict. This logic reveals a deep understanding that modern warfare is multidimensional. It is not enough to shoot faster or fly higher. We need to have roads for troops to travel along. We need to guarantee energy, communications, drinking water, transportation, the internet. We need to resist. Since the 2014 invasion of Crimea, Russia has made it clear that it is willing to use force to redraw Europe's borders. The war in Ukraine has only cemented this view. For Eastern European countries, NATO members living in Moscow's shadow, the threat is tangible. That is why the new investment will be concentrated primarily in this region. The logic is simple. If there is an attack, it will start there. And when it does, there will be no time for improvisation. Troops need to be positioned, vehicles need to have somewhere to pass, cities need to be evacuated in a coordinated manner, supply lines need to be armored. Russia reacted as expected. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov accused NATO of waging a demonization campaign against Moscow. He said the alliance needed an enemy to justify its spending, and that Russia had been conveniently cast in that role. But the rhetoric no longer resonates in the West. Cyber warfare, kamikaze drones, attacks on critical infrastructure, and Russian military exercises near NATO borders speak louder than any official pronouncement. Fear has gone from paranoia to contingency planning. NATO's new doctrine recognizes something fundamental. Conflicts no longer start with the sound of cannons, but with the click of a hacker or the drone's drone. A clear example of this was the daring Ukrainian attack that destroyed Russian bombers inside Russia, using a combination of cyber attack and infiltrated special forces. Another emblematic case was the Israeli attack that, thanks to cyber actions, neutralized Iran's anti-aircraft systems before it even launched its main missiles. These episodes shape the new Western military thinking. That's why the alliance is also investing in expanding its defense industrial capacity. The leaders at the Raya summit realized that there are not enough stocks to sustain a prolonged war against Russia. It is necessary to speed up contracts, encourage innovation, expand factories, produce drones, ammunition, radars, and mass protection systems. NATO wants to be one step ahead technologically, not just in brute force but in intelligence. And this new 5% level represents exactly that. More than a number, it is a symbol that the time for hesitation is over. Finally, in a speech marked by a triumphalist tone, Donald Trump summarized the new moment by saying that this plan represents more than $1 trillion a year invested in joint defense of the West. And, according to him, this is a victory not only for the United States, but for all Western civilization. The message was clear. The era of dependence is over. What is being built now is a permanent war structure, ready to respond to or ideally deter any threat even before it emerges. Because in this new chapter of history, to wait is to lose. And NATO does not intend to lose anymore.